My name is Thomas George Lazar. I come from a family of Mohawk chiefs, peacemakers, peacekeepers, warriors, and man-eaters, lacrosse magicians, tobacco salesmen, gangsters, shaman shit disturbers, and survivors. But instead of growing up around these heroes and zeros, I grew up on the East Mountain of Hamilton, Ontario, where a whole other tribe of madness prevailed. I'm a living, breathing lie, an embarrassment, a married man's mistake, and a young girl's only chance to hop a fence out of town and escape to freedom. The truth robbed me of my golden heart. The truth is a bastard just like me. Lights are low, did you leave town? Can I come by? Can we get low down? I always told the truth, but for you I'd lie. I can't own you, but I'd love to try. How does it feel to be lying by yourself? You're out of your deal. Tell me, how does it feel? How does it feel? I learned that the truth is a constant seeker, a warrior with the tenacity of a traveling salesman, knocking on every door, looking for its heavy-hearted delivery to exactly the right person. When I was small, the truth was whispered around kitchen tables while I peered out between the bars of my cheap wooden playpen at the shadows of my ancestors, sitting there in the dull glare of an out-of-fashion Bakelite lamp. The truth disguised itself to me. Sometimes I imagined it was an alien landing in my backyard outside my bedroom window. Once after I had my tonsils out, the truth appeared to me in a chloroform hallucination, druggy, dreamy, lost information that bobbed and weaved and staggered its way to my bedside like a drunken father on his way home from the Legion. Let me put some sugar where they put salt. The mistakes you made and all your fault. Let me seal your scars and ease your mind. Turn your deep blue heart into the loving kind. How does it feel? Lying by yourself. You're out of your deal. Tell me, how does it feel? How does it feel? For years, the truth strangled me with its unknown details and made me question myself, an attempt to shut out love. It drove me to countless attempts at self-destruction. The truth left me paralyzed and grasping for breath, struggling to free my voice from deep inside my guts in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. I tricked myself into believing that it was me that hunted down the truth. But in fact, the truth found me, and it wasn't the harmless, lily white, correct thing to do that we're taught in grade school, and there was no immediate rewards from it. The truth ain't nothing but a bastard, and so am I. You've been crying about the same thing every night. Are you out of love? Have you lost your fight? There's no easy way to pick up the slack. You're too young to lose and too old to get back. Ah, how does it feel to be lying by yourself? You're out, oh, you dear. How does it feel? How does it feel to be lying by yourself? You're out, oh, you dear. Tell me, how does it feel? I'm 58 years old. I like to tell people that I'm 60 because they tell me, you look really young, Tom. I also like these public appearances where I'm only on stage for 15 minutes because most of the time I'm concentrating on holding my stomach in. I just came from Hamilton today. I didn't pack any Spanx, so this should be pretty easy. Do you notice this? So 58 years old, at the age of 53, 5 years ago, I was going out on a speaking tour, and they give you a handler, and the handler was out in the limousine, and I get in the back of the limousine, and we're heading to Pearson Airport. And she says, I'm a big fan of yours. This is going to be great. And you don't know this, but your family and my family were friends. And I said to her, you know, I hear that a lot, mainly because of my last name, Wilson. But in fact, my mother and father, Bunny and George, were really, really old. George was blinded in the Second World War. He was a tail gunner in a Lancaster bomber. For those of you that don't know, the suicide seat of the Second World War. Most of the men, boys, that sat in that seat didn't make it home. George Wilson made it home, a hero, but a broken man with a massive head injury, blinded, with various addictions. So the house was dark. The house was shut down. I was an only child. They didn't have any friends in my hometown. And then she said, well, my grandmother knew Bunny. Her name was Mary Brennan. And I couldn't believe that I remembered that name. And my heart burst open with love because I didn't think that Bunny had any friends. She goes, yes, they were really good friends. In fact, they were so close that my grandmother was there the day you were adopted. And I said, what? That started a 5-year journey, everybody. It started a 5-year journey so far for me that included writing a book of all things, which I thought I would never do. Random House called me and said, hey, have you ever thought of writing a book? I said, fuck no, that sounds like way too much work. So in that journey, ladies and gentlemen, I go out and I talk on CBC and I talk Globe and Mail and Maclean's, and all the time they talk about the discoveries over the last 5 years. I grew up an only child, and 2 summers ago I met 6 of my possible 11 brothers and sisters. I found out that the woman who's my cousin, the matriarch of our family, Janie, who sits at the head of the table for Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving and all the kids' birthdays, turns out to be my mother. And I found out that I'm not a big, puffy, sweaty Irish guy like I thought I was. I'm actually a big, puffy, sweaty Mohawk man. So when I go to these respectful interviewers, they always say, "So Tom, how does it feel to be a Mohawk?" They say it to me like I just hopped a fence and landed in a reserve. Or I broke a window and ended up in somebody's kitchen sitting around having a smoke and a cup of coffee, like I had arrived. But in fact, I haven't arrived, because I have to show respect and love, and I have to embrace the bravery, and the power, and the honor of my people. And you can't do that overnight. If I was to do that, I'd be playing catch-up. I mean, I'm a baby that was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, was put into a Catholic nursery, orphanage, I guess, and then into foster care. So I've come a long way. My resilience, I feel, has been great, but I'm still learning. So when they ask me, "Tom, how does it feel to be a Mohawk?" I think about my brothers. I think about the Oka crisis. During the Oka crisis, I was in Hamilton, Ontario. I was watching it on the national news and reading it in the Globe and Mail, listening to it on the radio. My blood was burning fire. I didn't know why. While I was doing that in Hamilton, my two brothers, younger brothers, were sitting at their kitchen tables, filling out wills, picking up automatic weapons, and going out to the woods to fight a war that they didn't think they were coming home from. So, Tom, how does it feel to be a Mohawk? My family is generations and generations of ironworkers, skywalkers, the romantic term, the men who built America into the air. My great-great-grandfather is one of those guys sitting eating his lunch in that famous photo, building Rockefeller Center. My Uncle Sonny was the legend of the family. My Uncle Walter put the antenna up on the World Trade Center. And when 9/11 came, it was my brother Kyle, who with 200 other Mohawk ironworkers moved into Ground Zero. They were the first of the first responders to move debris away safely so that the firemen could get in and put out the fire. When my brother got home, my brother Kyle, he got home to Ganawage, he bathed himself and cleansed himself in tobacco water because he felt that he had the spirits of all those people inside him. So, Tom, how does it feel to be a Mohawk? My long road home was going back to the reserve for the first time and to that legend, Sonny's house, and I knocked on that door. My cousin Sharon opened it, and I walked in, and Sonny was over in the corner in a walker, and he raised himself up. This is the man that is the legend to me all my life. This is the man that actually wanted to raise me. And he put his arms out. And I walked over to him, and we hugged. And for the first time in my life, now I got to tell you, I got kids and I got grandkids. I know what it's like to hold and love somebody and give everything you've got to somebody. But to have it reversed for the first time in my life, when Sonny put his arms around me, I felt that blood-on-blood connection. He said to me, "Tom, you would have been a great lacrosse player." He also said, "And you would have been a millionaire in the cigarette business." I was in Nashville in November. I got word that Sonny had been in the hospital for a couple weeks, and I was flying to Montreal to promote my book, Beautiful Scars. I flew from Nashville to Montreal, and I got out at the Pierre Trudeau Airport into a limousine, and he was going to take me to the hotel, and I said, "No, you're taking me over to Ganawage. I'm going to the hospital there." And I went to visit Sonny because I hadn't seen him in a while, and it had been 2 weeks that he had been in the hospital. And I walked into the hospital and sat on his bed, and he woke up, and he said, "Tom, thank God you've come. Now I can finally go and be with my wife, Hazel." I said, "Shut up, Sonny." He said, "You're sticking around. I'm coming back with my grandsons, and we're going to have a great time." And we hung out, and we talked about the Montreal Canadiens. We talked about my mother and my father. And I left him there and went back to the hotel in Montreal. Got up the next morning, got in a car. I was heading to the CBC to do an interview, and I got a phone call from my cousin Sharon that Sonny had died during the night. But I got that time with him, and I felt that blood on blood, and I was resilient. So, Tom, what does it feel like to be a Mohawk? So far, fantastic. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome returning 514 Talks host, the anchor of BNN Bloomberg, business journalist, and best-selling author, Amanda Lang.
Wow, that is a tough act to follow. Can we have another round of applause for Tom Wilson? I can't think of a better speaker to start a day that is themed redefining community. That was incredibly powerful. I'd also like to thank Tom for getting the swearing out of the way. All of the other speakers can relax, including me. You now know that Tom is an incredibly talented author, writer, speaker, and musician. You may not know just all of the details about this Renaissance man, so let me just enlighten those of you who don't. He's a 3-time Juno Award winner. He's got multiple gold records. He's written and recorded songs for many of the people that we know and love, including Sarah McLachlan, City and Colour, Jason Isbell, Colin James, Lucinda Williams, Billy Ray Cyrus, Mavis Staples, and the Rankin Family. His own band, Junk House, has scored 11 top 10 hits. His iconic Americana-fueled Blackie and the Rodeo Kings was widely publicized for its presence on George Bush's iPod. I bet Tom loved that. Tom's most recent incarnation, Lee Harvey Osmond, is getting extensive praise and airplay through the US, where he's been touring in the last 2 years. He's an artist, and his work has shown in galleries in New York City, Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa. And as you know, he's written a beautiful autobiographical book, Beautiful Scars, and it really is about the scars that make us who we are, that hurt us, but also shape us. Another round of applause, please, for Tom Wilson. Good morning and welcome to the Children's Aid Foundation of Canada's 4th annual 514 Talks. This is the second time that I've been here with you, and I'm delighted to be back. This is such a meaningful day, morning, and as you already know, those of you who have been here before, you will be moved, you will be inspired, you might be enraged. Those are all good things, but we also intend that we hear from you, that you share in this, and that this be a day that shapes your thinking and your actions. Take these stories away, put them in your heart. What you just heard should change the way you think about things, and I know that will happen today. Redefining community is our focus, and the focus there is to better support our youth in care. Everybody has their own definition of community, each one of us, and it may change over time. But for children and youth who are in care or experience the child welfare system, community means something different. Their life experience is different. So many of us can't even imagine what life is like for these young people who, through no fault of their own, have experienced abandonment, abuse, neglect, insurmountable poverty, then followed by instability, social isolation, all of the things that come, however well-intentioned, with being raised in a system. What we know, though, is they have strength and resilience, and you will see some of that here today. That is the message of hope. They persevere. Ontario Children and Youth in Care Day is specifically aimed at recognizing those who are still living in care. Many of these young people are voiceless in their struggles, and yet we have in this room with us people who have risen above their situations, who, through no fault of their own, have managed to rise and pursue their own goals and have an impact on their communities as they define them. We also have among us the people who dedicate their time to supporting these people and supporting the systems and people who work to make their lives better. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here. We note that we are live streaming this event, so welcome to everybody who's watching this live streamed. And we would welcome your participation. There will be Q&As happening this morning, and we would love to hear your questions. And the way that you should do that is through social media. You can do it over the webcast in the same way. The hashtag is 514talks. So please do send us your questions. Just a quick recap of how the morning will work. If you've been here before, you'll remember, but there are 5 speakers who each speak for 14 minutes. They cover a range of topics. After the first 3 speakers, there's a short Q&A. Then there will be a conversational break, and then come back for a spoken word performance by Meredith Graham, and then hear from the remaining 2 speakers, and after that, another Q&A here on the stage. That's when you'll have your chance to interact with all of the speakers, which we hope you'll do. There's also, you'll see a space in your program to write notes. Feel free to make use of that as you listen to some of these speakers. And finally, we have a new initiative this year, which is very fun. On the theme of redefining community, we're asking you to participate. Just how different each one of us may have of our own notion of what community is. So what we want to do is contribute to our What is Community collaborative photo collage, and asking you to help populate that with images. So what we're asking is post an image of what you consider your community to Instagram or Twitter with the hashtag 514talksmycommunity. I bet that's in your program. And those images then will be printed by a hashtag printer and added to the wall. For those of you who are here in person, you can actually stop by the photo collage near reception and see your image in the collage. Let's begin. Let's kick it off with our first speaker. We're delighted to have him here with us. He is from New York, Dr. David Bernstein, a senior forensic psychologist. He's held appointments at Yale, the Yale School of Medicine, Harvard University Medical School. He consults with law enforcement agencies and has been embedded in the field with law enforcement. He describes himself as a former street kid. He was raised in the foster care system of New York City. He learned early the survival skills that he would need within that system, where it was pretty easy to get lost. And today he's bringing his knowledge and lived experience of that system to help children and youth at risk to see new ways of seeing their own circumstances and finding that resilience. So without further ado, please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. David Bernstein.
Thank you. Hello. So I'd like you to imagine, if you would, a juvenile justice facility. A juvenile justice facility that's reminiscent of sort of a mini prison, if you will. I'm talking 8 feet high gates with razor wires along the top, where the young inmates in the facility are shackled and handcuffed in and out as they're escorted by correctional officers. Now, I was at this facility that I met a young man named Victor. Now, Victor was a tall, muscular African-American kid who looked a lot bigger and older than his 14 years. And as the clinical coordinator for the mental health overlay program at the facility, I would generally read every kid's file before they came in and introduce myself to them as they came in. And I remember Victor came in. He was a kind of a quiet, brooding young man. And, you know, other than being a large kid, it wasn't a lot that stood out about Victor, except for one thing that stood out very much, and that was along his right hand were tattooed the letters F-U-C-K, and along his left were tattooed the letters L-I-F-E. Now, I didn't know a lot about Victor, to be honest. I knew Victor had been arrested multiple times since he was 9 years old. I knew that Victor had been in the foster care system at one point because he was assigned a social worker. I knew that he was arrested only for property-type crimes and had never been arrested for any violent crime ever in his life. I knew his mom was a crack cocaine addict and that his father was never in his life. Also knew he had 2 young brothers and that he would often take care of his brothers and fed them. Every adult in Victor's life had let this boy down, this young man. I spoke to the social worker who was supposed to be seeing Victor, checking in with him and his family about every other week, but like a lot of social workers in urban areas, his caseload was double what it should have been and hadn't seen Victor in 6 months. And prior to that, there was 6 months before he had seen him. I know that the teachers were supposed to check in with the social worker if Victor started missing school, but they literally just didn't even bother to do it. Again, every adult who had the opportunity to give Victor safe passage through childhood failed him. And what I found particularly disturbing is when I asked, what happened? Where was the disconnect? Why didn't you guys know what was going on with this young man? To appease their own guilt or to take away any responsibility, they would say, but he's a criminal. Do you see those tattoos on his hand? He's a criminal. This is where he should be. It's not our fault. So today, I'm here to talk about community and the imprint that community will have on a young person's life for the rest of their life going forward. Now, every parent tries to create a community for their child where their child can feel safe and have the sense of something bigger than themselves, a place that if they fail, they know there's a soft place for them to land. And they trust in that. But what happens when community fails? What happens when a child doesn't believe the concept of community applies to them? Because every adult that had the opportunity to help them failed them. And so for them, community is an illusion more than it's a reality. So we use the word community all the time, don't we? Use the word community for the work community or the religious community, the Native community. We have the word community we use for a lot of different things. But what exactly is community? Well, for many children and young adults in the system, it's a really difficult question to ask, right? Is it the foster home they find themselves in at that moment? Is it the foster care system in general? Or maybe it's the runaway shelter or the abandoned building that they're going to be sleeping in that night. For many of these kids, there's no roots. There's no connection. And for these kids, there's no place they feel safe enough to unpack their bags. That's not going to happen for them. So for them, community is fluid. And it's not always a place that they're going to make a connection to that wonderful foster placement. And everyone looks at them and goes, this is such a great foster placement, right? Why aren't they connecting more to this particular placement? They should be happy to be there. So I grew up as a ward of the state of New York. I grew up in and out of a multitude of foster homes and group homes and runaway shelters throughout New York City. Slept in a lot of abandoned buildings, squatted quite a bit as a kid. And I remember this one placement they put me at. It was lauded to be this amazing placement. And I remember the social worker telling me how lucky I was to be put in this particular placement. It was in a neighborhood. Everything was supposed to be this just awesome placement. It's funny how memory works, isn't it? When you think back, the pieces that you remember. For example, I remember the walls in this placement were newly painted. Kind of remember the smell, and that there were no marks on this very white wall. And even though I don't remember specifically the face of the foster father or the foster mother or the son, their biological son, who's maybe a year or two younger than myself, the one thing that I remember of a few things, but one thing that stands out big time for me is it was the first time in my life I had ever seen filet mignon, right? I'm telling you guys, and I could not stop staring at this. It was a steak with bacon wrapped around it and a toothpick through it, and all I could think of was meat wrapped in meat. Holy crap. Mind blown. It was amazing. But the other thing I remember very vividly from that placement, my short time there, was the message I received that night when I sat down to dinner at this wonderful foster placement where the father had a steak, and the mother had a steak, and the son had a steak, and I had a hot dog. And I never forgot that. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even put off by it. You know why? They weren't my family. They didn't owe me anything. I was happy to have the hot dog, to be honest, and I didn't begrudge them that. But what stands out is the message I received that night. And you know what that message was? You might be in our house, but you are not of our house. And I ran away from that placement the next day or the day after. And where did I run to? I ran to a place I'd run to several times before, a place in the heart of New York City's porn district. At the time, it was on 42nd Street and 8th Avenue. For those of you who know New York City, the Marquis, the whole 9 yards, it was this wonderful place called Covenant House, and I had gone there so many times. And I remember going in, and the first person I saw was a counselor named Mike Fisher, big guy, great guy. And he saw me, and he said, "David, what's up? How you doing?" And I smiled. And as I went further through, I met one of the nuns on the way through who knew me, and she was like, "Dave, how you doing?" And as she handed me a blanket and a pillow, and as I squeezed in on the floor between several of the other kids that were sleeping there that night, that were runaways or abused or what have you, I smiled. And I remember feeling more at home on the floor of a runaway shelter in the heart of the porn district of New York City than I ever did at that great foster home. So what's community for these kids? Well, I think community is simple. It's that place where you feel that you belong. It's that place where the message that you get is that you're not just in the house, but you're as much of the house as everyone else here. You belong here as much as anyone else belongs to be here. So, sorry, just had my notes. So, the other thing about community, of course, is community teaches us what we need to know to survive within that community, the skills that we need. Now, if you grow up in this wonderful community, right, well, those skills might be how to go on to college and how to create a life with family and to feel connected and to thrive. But in other communities, the skills you learn are just about how to survive and how to not get hurt in those communities. So one of the other things we get at the communities that we find ourselves in is we develop mentorships, right? And one of my greatest mentors when I was a kid in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, was a homeless man named Oxidine. Now, Oxidine was a drug addict, and I would help Oxidine pick bottles and cans up sometimes. And I remember walking home from school one day, and Oxidine had saw me crying. Now, where I grew up, I was the only Caucasian kid in my school. And as we all know, whenever you are different in any way, it becomes easy for, people to pick on you, and my difference certainly stood out. And as I was walking by, Oxidine came over to me and he said, "Boy, what's wrong?" And I said, "I'm just tired of, these kids calling me white boy and cracker and, telling me I'm a foster kid and I don't have any family and all this stuff." And Oxidine looked at me as serious as I had ever seen him. And he took me by the shoulders and he squared me up and he said, "Boy, look at me." He said, "If they don't feed you, F you, or pay your rent, who gives a crap what they think about you?" But he didn't use crap. But you want to know something? He was right. he was 100% right. And I must have, through the years now, have said that to myself 1,000,000 times. Whenever I find myself over-concerned with what some stranger thinks about me, oxidizing words come flooding back to me. See, when the concept of community is a fluid thing, when it's not fixed and faces change, you learn to take your wisdom where you find it. And as strange as it might seem, he was one of my mentors growing up. Now, I'm a big believer in, and I'm certain everyone here is a big believer in, that everyone, all children, deserve safe passage through childhood. Yet, in foster care system, well, foster care children are more likely to be victims of abuse and of pedophiles than any other group out there. Now, these are statistics from the United States, but they do apply to Canada also. And in fact, the only major difference is that it tends to be more applicable to indigenous population because of the representation of the indigenous population within the foster care system. But other than that, the numbers aren't that different. And the statistics are not just horrifying, but shameful. And what they show is, depending on the city you're looking at, child sex workers, what we would call child sex traffickers, right, make up between that 50 to 80% of them, right, are foster care related. Let me say that again. 50 to 80% of child sex traffickers are connected to the foster care system. This is not something you can ignore. This is a huge, huge problem. In fact, it's a problem that has been given a name 15 years ago or so. And now, what is it referred to? It's actually referred to as the foster care to prostitution pipeline. Now, that was first referred to 15 years ago in 2003, and it was last referred to publicly in an article this year. 15 years, and I can tell you it goes back a lot further than that. So how bad are the stats? Well, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported that in 2016, of all the children reported to them, about 3,000 of them were child sex workers, they believe. And of that 3,000, 87% were found to be social service related. Think about that number. That's a huge number. In 2013, the FBI did a nationwide raid, a crackdown on child sex workers, and they found that 60% of the children that were rescued were foster care related, that were either in foster care or group homes. In that same study, and probably one of the most egregious things, is they found that a large portion of these kids were not even reported by their foster families. Now, those of you who are former foster care, I think you know why, right? Why? Because they would have stopped paying them. That's egregious. That's horrible. It's a pretty terrible thing. So what makes these kids so vulnerable then to being victims of prostitution? The answer is simple. Because the system groomed them pretty early on. Pretty early on, they learned that for many, not all, I've seen some amazing, wonderful foster homes, but a large group of foster homes, the only reason that they are there is because they're being paid for them to be there. They're already creating profit for a system. So it's not a big leap for them to start creating profit for a new system. And the more placements they go to, the more they come to the understanding that that's my value. And that everybody has an angle. Everybody has an ulterior motive. And that's just their ulterior motive. So when I was a boy, one of the foster homes that I was at was this amazing foster home in a great suburb. It was supposed to be the greatest thing ever in the whole world. It was supposed to be amazing. And I remember going to this foster home thinking very vividly, you know, God gave me a bad hand, and now you're going to make everything okay. I was 13, almost 14, and really wanting to believe that. And I remember the foster mother was sweet, and she was so nice to me. And before the end of the month, when I went to kiss her goodbye, because I wanted to check out this new area, she grabbed me and really kissed me. And when I pushed away, she started to tell me, who's it really hurting? What's the big deal? And I remember my heart sinking into my stomach as I thought, what an idiot to let your guard down, man. Just for that second, you let your guard down. And you know, this is just about, you know, again, this is her wants and needs, and this is, you know, everybody has an angle. This is her angle. So I wanted to talk about, when we talk about community, you know, and we think of a tribe or a family, but for a child, you know, a human child, we all have this need to be part of a community, this need to be part of a group. And the lessons we learn from that community will follow us into adulthood and for the rest of our lives without question. But for so many children, the messages that they will get is there is no safe passage through childhood. So my challenge to everyone in this room is to stop this pipeline, stop this pathway of endless victims for pedophiles and pimps. Ask yourself, when you look at one of these children, what do you see? What do you really see? Do you see the next Leonardo da Vinci, the next Gandhi, the next Martin Luther King? Or do you see a criminal or someone to pity? Because the reality of this is very simple. How you see that child, and this is for all children, is how they will eventually see themselves, without question. And then ask yourself, is there a child whose hand I can take and walk with and personally give safe passage through childhood? Now, I'd like to end this where I started, with my last conversation with Victor. Now, before Victor left, he was one of the greatest kids I ever had the, actual benefit of working with. He was just an amazing kid. It was a privilege to work with this young man, and he wasn't a thug. He wasn't a bad kid. So in my office, I said, Victor, man, what's up with this on your knuckles? That's not you. You're better than that. I said, and not only that, but, people are going to look at you, and they're going to judge you on this. And Victor looked down, and he looked up at me, and he said, Dr. Bernstein, you don't know what this means? I said, no, man, educate me. What does this mean? And he said, this means forgive us crazy kids living in fear everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, David. Many of us come to this to support places and things like Children's Aid Foundation or Covenant House because we have children who sleep in safe beds at home, loved and cared for. And we know that there are way too many children who don't have that. And we want to be that person that can help. David's beautiful reminder that it is sometimes one individual that can change a vulnerable young person's life. In his case, Oxidine, but just one individual, and what a great honor it would be to be that individual for a vulnerable child or youth. One of the places that these young people still suffer is in transition. because youth in care suddenly becomes an adult not in care. And the term adult, of course, anybody who has an 18-year-old knows we probably need to rethink just what an adult is and at what age that should apply. And our next speaker is doing important research into the question of how long-term relationships can help through that transition period. She's a PhD candidate at McGill University's School of Social Work. She's a member of the Center for Research on Children and Families, and in 2015, she co-founded a peer support group, the Montreal Youth in Care Alumni Student Association, served on the board of directors as well of the member of the Quebec Youth in Care Network, Care Jeunesse. Her name is Melanie Doucette, and I hope you will give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
I'm 17 years old. I'm at school, skipping class, and hiding in the girls' bathroom, alone and crying. I'm having a panic attack. The room feels like it's closing in on me. The lights are blinding. Everything feels like it's spiraling out of control, like I have no control over my own body or even my own life. Most of my classmates have no idea what I'm going through. From the outside looking in, everything appears to be going great. I'm about to graduate with honors. I have a great group of friends. I'm the vice president of the student council. And I just got appointed as valedictorian for the graduating class. You see, even though I am an overachiever, I'm also a foster kid. I just moved into a new temporary placement, my 6th since coming into care at age 13. I had to be abruptly removed from my last placement after I was sexually assaulted by my foster parent. I wasn't offered any counseling to deal with the trauma that I was experiencing. Instead, I was forced to confront my aggressor in a face-off with him, his wife, and my social worker in his home to prove to the system that this placement was no longer appropriate for me or any other foster kid. Luckily, one of my friend's parents agreed to take me in until I graduate. Even one of my teachers at school offered me a place to stay if I needed one. But I know that the support is temporary. I know that I can't find a forever home at this point because teenagers rarely get adopted out of foster care. Returning to my biological family is also not an option. I'm terrified at the thought of having to age out of the system and make it out on my own into the real world. You see, I know the facts. Provincial legislation across Canada mandates child welfare agencies to release youth from their care at the age of majority, at the young age of 18 or 19, oftentimes far before we're ready. The end date of support is fast approaching for me, and I have to move to a town that's 3 hours away to go to university in the fall. I haven't received any training, and there's no plan in place for my transition to adulthood. I have no idea how I'm going to find the resources and the support that I need to make the move, let alone to make it out into the real world on my own. I also know that I can't return into care in times of crisis, so there's incredible pressure on me to not mess it up. I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders as these thoughts swirl in my head as I lay on the cold bathroom floor. I feel incredibly overwhelmed, alone, and terrified of what lies ahead. I'd like for people in the audience who are over the age of majority and that don't have care experience to think about your turning of age birthday. Were you ready to be a fully self-sufficient adult? Now I want you to think back to when you moved out of your parents' home. Were you able to return if you needed a place to stay or a place to spend the holidays? Were you able to count on them for support and maintain a relationship with them after you moved out? For most people who aren't in care, they don't age out of their families at the age of majority. And recent Canadian statistics show that young people are staying at home up until the age of 29 and continue to rely on their families, their friends, and their communities for support throughout their adult lives. This is simply a normal part of life for them. Turning of age is usually a celebratory event, marking one's passage to adulthood, full of friends, family, presents, and cake. For youth in care, it's often a dreaded deadline. They're forced out of the only support system that they have and into the real world with only a few garbage bags of belongings to their names. Happy birthday, we no longer support you, don't ever come back. So today I want us all to ask ourselves, why are we holding youth exiting care to standards that even their peers are not held to? We need to stop focusing on independent living as the standard goal for youth exiting care and shift our energy and our resources towards interdependent living, a life where you feel welcomed and supported by your community. This means acknowledging that youth in and from care have a basic human need for connection and support, just like their peers do. It also means investing in long-term supportive relationships while youth are still in care, to build and nurture lasting communities of connection that will support them throughout their entire adult lives. Nearly 7,000 youth age out of the Canadian child welfare system every year. Less than half will receive the transition services that they need. Over 1/3 will feel completely unprepared to leave care. Most of them are either not involved in decision-making processes that affect their lives or are unaware of the existence of a transition plan. They often feel like they have no voice and no power to control their own situations. Research also shows us that the status quo is not working. Youth exiting care are at high risk of experiencing multiple difficulties. They're 200 times more likely to become homeless than their peers. They have PTSD rates comparable to Vietnam War veterans. They're more likely to end up in the youth criminal justice system than graduating high school. And less than half will get their high school diploma, compared to 80 to 90% of their peers. Not a pretty picture. Because of this sudden cutoff of services, youth exiting care tend to have limited support networks, and the connections that they make during their time in care are formal, paid for, and have an expiry date. This is despite research indicating that long-term supportive relationships can act as a bridge and a buffer during the difficult transition to adulthood. There's this famous quote that goes, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." We need to do things differently. Youth in and from care are also far more than just a case file number or a statistic. They're living, breathing human beings with personalities, talents, and strengths. They want to feel valued, loved, and welcomed into their communities, just like their peers do. This past fall, I had the opportunity to lead a collaborative research project with 8 former youth in care between the ages of 19 and 29 in the greater Vancouver area. We looked at the relationships that matter to them and how they can be developed and nurtured over time. We also looked at barriers and made recommendations to improve policy and practice. Using a unique arts-based research method called photo voice, the youth were given digital cameras and photography training and asked to take photos representing themes on long-term supportive relationships. This process took 12 weeks, and at the end of the project, we held a photo exhibit open to the community to showcase their talents and raise awareness on the issue. Today, I want to show you a few photos from the project, specifically those related to long-term supportive relationships and community. This photo is titled "Home is a Person, Not a Place." At first glance, this might look like a parking lot to you, but this is actually the viewpoint of Sabian as he's sitting at a local Starbucks, accessing the free Wi-Fi and connecting online with his friends. Most of his connections have been developed and nurtured online because he experiences social anxiety. For him, the feeling of being at home, of belonging to a community, is within those connections rather than a physical place. And this is often the case for many youth in care, as we tend to experience multiple placements, which impacts our ability to feel a sense of home. So we find ways to belong by developing connections in conventional and non-conventional ways. I can personally relate to this piece. A year before I graduated high school, I got involved in the electronic music community. Music was always something that resonated deeply with me because I had fond memories of bonding with my dad as a kid over his record collection. When I first started going out to shows, I was completely blown away by the artistry of the DJs mixing the records together, making this magical musical journey for the crowd to connect to. The people I met in this community were flamboyant, shamelessly authentic, and kind. I was welcomed with open arms and encouraged to truly be myself without judgment. No one cared that I was a foster kid. I was supported by this community as I learned how to DJ, and I started playing my first gigs by the time I was 20. I've played hundreds of gigs over the last 18 years, and I actually still do to this day. It's my creative outlet, and another way for me to tell my story through music. DJing started as a fun hobby for me, but it actually helped me grow as a person and helped me become part of a community that I still belong to today. And it's the people within this community who helped me get through some of the toughest times of my life as I was aging out of care. For me, my sense of community isn't with a particular neighborhood or a city, but it's rather in the people and the connections that I've developed and nurtured over time, many of which are still active in my life today. I like to call my friends my chosen family, and they make me feel at home no matter where I lay my head at night. Like Sabian, I maintain a lot of those relationships via social media. To me, that's what community should be all about. A network of meaningful connections that you belong to, that follows you throughout your life, lifts you up and supports you, no matter where you go. This next piece is titled Brighter Days Ahead. In this photo, Martha is looking at a group of alumni from CARE as they're getting ready to take the ferry from Vancouver to Victoria to participate in a march in front of the BC legislature for the rights of youth in and from CARE. For many, including Martha, this is their first time rallying together as a community to raise their voices and be heard. Funding from youth-serving organizations is making their participation possible and is oftentimes the only way that former youth in care can be engaged citizens in their communities. I can also personally relate to this piece. It wasn't until I was 29 that I was able to connect with other former youth in care through my involvement in the New Brunswick Youth in Care Network. In November 2012, I was a speaker alongside other network members at the very first New Brunswick Youth in Care hearings held at the provincial legislature. We presented our experiences during and after care in front of the Premier, the Child and Youth Advocate, the Minister of Social Development, and other key decision makers in government. By the end of the day, there wasn't a dry eye in the House, and we were able to obtain government commitment to examine and implement our recommendations for change. It's actually my involvement in the network that inspired me to pursue my PhD, because I was able to witness the power that the voices of youth can have in affecting change when given the right platform. And after all, who knows what works and what doesn't work best than those who have lived through it? They say it takes a village to raise a child, but in reality, it doesn't stop at the end of childhood. It's a lifelong effort. We need to go further as a community and as a society and rally around youth in and from care so that they can grow into healthy, thriving members of our communities. One of the key learnings from the work that I do is that it's so important to truly listen to the voices of youth from care. Give them platforms in their communities. Invite them as experts at decision-making tables. Youth in and from care often feel disconnected from their communities, and they're conditioned to believe that being self-sufficient is a characteristic of a successful young adult, even though their peers who aren't in care aren't expected to live their lives in total isolation and without the support of their communities. We need to change this cycle of disconnection. We also need to reinforce that asking for and accepting help is not a sign of weakness, but it's rather a way for youth in and from care to nurture their basic need for human connection and invest in their own potential. This piece is titled "The Light in Our Hearts." Jordan wrote a poem to accompany it, which I'll read out to you. This, to me, is the fire of my heart. Keeping it burning is a delicate art. A gentle breeze, enough to put it out. Another light's gone, stirs nothing but doubt. Alone we suffer, but I know where to start. Together we're brighter, the light in our hearts. Jordan compares each young person from care to a delicate flame, one that needs care and nurturing to continue burning. When a single flame is isolated, it's at higher risk of burning out. But when many individual flames come together as a community, the light emanating from these flames becomes brighter, warmer, and stronger. For youth in and from care, meaningful and authentic connections with people who will give that extra mile to help makes the world of a difference. I'm living proof of that. From that social worker who put in that extra effort as I was aging out of care, to my friends who let me crash on their couches in my 20s, to their parents who opened their homes to me during the holidays so that I wouldn't be alone, to the DJs who helped me learn the craft and land my first gigs, to my bosses and my colleagues who believed in my potential and gave me opportunities to flourish. These connections forever changed my life and made me feel part of a community, part of something worth living for. So today I leave you all with a call to action. Take a chance, reach out, show kindness, and authentically connect with a young person from care. Help fuel their flame. It will only make your communities stronger and brighter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. A really important and powerful message. And for those of you who were here last year, I'd like to reassure Melanie that I believe that the people in this room actually do make things happen. Last year, Margaret McCain stood on stage and made a passionate advocacy for preschool, universal preschool, care that begins at the age of 2. And 10.5 months later, a provincial budget contained that exact item. Now, that provincial budget may never actually be anything more than a document, but it's an idea that I actually believe some of the people in the room helped foster, turning it into real policy. Take what you're hearing here and take it away and do things with it. Those of you who are here in positions of power, it's one of the best things that we can do. And hearing from people like Melanie is the way that we become inspired. So thank you for that, Melanie. The question of community is sometimes about reclaiming one's community, and that can be true for vulnerable youth, and it is also true for Indigenous youth, both in care and out of care. And our next speaker has spent her life passionately helping Indigenous children and youth reclaim a sense of their Indigenous culture. She's a member of the Anishinaabe Nation, and she's worked for many years with young people reviving Indigenous cultural identity. She emphasizes the cultural but also linguistic, the land. And since 2009, she's been employed at MacDonald Youth Services, leading their Indigenous cultural services. So please join me in a warm welcome for Chrissy Courchain.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, Anin. Nashki b'nei Sikweis, Shiship Tudam, Segin Dunji. My spirit name is Eagle Woman Coming Down to Earth. My clan is the Bird Clan, and I come from Seguin First Nation. Now, what I want to share with you today is locating myself in an Indigenous way. By doing this, it's showing where I am connected with land. It's an Indigenous thing. When Indigenous people meet each other, they often ask, "Ande na, where are you from?" And that's how they place you through your family. So here, my home community is located about 126 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg, the southern tip of Lake Winnipeg. According to Anishinaabe Ishitiwin, our customs, Depwewin, and our spiritual narrative oral history passed down through the many generations, our Akini Matawin, our ancient teachings gifted to Anishinaabe, human beings, from Giji Manitou. And the instructions that each nation has been given has to do with on how our children were to be raised. Melanie, could you get the next slide, please? Heather, sorry. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is Ganawe Dunji Aki Ganawe Dunji, which is we are the land and the land is us. Ambeng Dawin Anishinaabe Abeno Jiag. So what we're doing is we're calling our children home. We're calling them in. We're asking them to come home. So what you see here would be a First Nation community. If you were to travel out, this is what you would be coming into, most First Nations. This one here, this photo was done in my home community, Seguin First Nation. And what we were doing here was a fall harvest, because to us, knowledge is alive, knowledge is experiential, and the only way to gain this knowledge is through those interactions with community and with land, Aki. We call land Aki. So here, what you see is the fall harvest. Next slide, please, Heather. Abenuji ene damano dash ishchi gewin. What this is, it's the Anishinaabe ways of knowing and being. So what we mean by this is that our knowledge has been bestowed to us from the Creator, Giji Manitou. We have a site back home that's here. It's called Manituapi. And in this sacred site, it is foretold that this is where the Creator comes down to the people. And the Creator gives instructions on how to live a good life. These instructions, Minopa Matasewin, gives each person within our community a purpose to walk with. Everybody has something to do. There are strengths in numbers. So that's our way of knowing and being, because I am the land and the land is me. That is very important for us. Next slide, please, Heather. Nitagi ke dosuin. Nike dosuin is to learn our knowledge, learn our Indigenous ways of knowing and being. This person here is one of the youth that I've had the pleasure of working with. These young people, they give so much. They give so much to us, and I learned so much. It is a great honor for me as a Yogechita and a Shkabes to be able to come in and work with these young ones. It was foretold that each Indigenous person within our communities all have responsibilities. These responsibilities come through what we call Dongdem. I'll speak a little bit about it as we move along, but that is really what guides us in the work that we do. So we encourage our ones to go back, to reconnect back in. That's why we're calling them home. Next slide, please. Aki ki keno o matuin. Aki ki keno o matuin. Land education. Land education to us is everything. It takes a strong spirit to be able to go out to that land, to be able to interact with that land. That land has everything that we need for survival. Everything that you need, from the medicines to the animals. And our way of knowing and being with the Anishinaabe, the Indigenous worldview, everything for us is all interconnected. We have relationships. To us, everything is connected. So living with this land, that is one of the tools that I use. I take our young people out to the land, and for a lot of them, they've been urbanized their whole life. Now, if you can imagine an Indigenous child who has never even touched the earth. There was this one young guy, I took a group out medicine picking one day, and the guys had to have these clips on the legs because they were being monitored. And these guys never left Winnipeg before. Big guys, big macho guys, right? In the city, they were big guys. So I was like, come on, let's go. So we went to the land. I had a favorite medicine picking spot. And so I was taking the group through this thing, and the other ones are like, oh, these 3 guys are taking off. And I said, no, don't worry, because the land I chose, there was water, and then there was highway. And I knew like they were gonna go towards the water, which was just Lake Winnipeg. So, and I wasn't worried, they weren't gonna swim very far, right? The land was working with me, and I was working with the land, because I am the land, and the land is me. So we get out there, and then I'm teaching the youth about the spots to pick certain medicines, when to harvest them, where to harvest them, the protocol of harvesting them. These are all things that can only be taught through experiential learning. So as we're going, I'm taking us, we do this circle around, and how many people here have been in the bush? The thick bush. Have you ever been, and I'm not talking parks, I'm talking like thick natural bush. Okay, now you know, for us, when you go into thick natural bush, it's like your life, and this is what I was teaching them. You can't just take off running. You have to be careful, and you have to plan your steps of how you're going to get to where you need to go. And you have to do things in a purposeful way. So these young guys didn't listen to the teaching, and they thought they were being so sneaky. They take off into the bush. I'm watching them. I know where they're going. I know my place well. So I circle us around, and we're doing a cedar teaching. And all of a sudden, you hear these cracklings coming through the bush. They're crackling, and then you hear a couple screams. And I'm like, okay, now I situated us so we were going to see these 3 guys try run right past us. Well, they couldn't do it, because that thick bush was teaching them a lesson, which was, again, you have to plan your steps as you're going through life. So when they came in, I asked them, well, why are you guys screaming? What's going on here? And one guy said, oh, a big bear. It was a big, big bear, he said. The other guy said, no, it was a wolf. It was a wolf, and that wolf was chasing us. And then I giggled, and then I looked up, and I said, no, I said, Jitamu, it was a squirrel. It was a squirrel, and these are big, like, in the city, they're tough guys, right? We take them to the land. And those squirrels, and I thank those squirrels, Bigwitch, Jitamu, because they brought those kids back, and we worked together to teach them. So those guys admitted that they ate humble pie, right? They're like, we ate, so. But what I really want to get into, and what I really want to share with you today, is when a child is removed from our authentic community, the land, and from our ancient teachings, knowledge is not passed on. The child is denied their inherent birthright, and as Anishinaabe, their community, their clan, is denied the help and the resource that this person was foretold to fulfill. I want to share with you today our need and desire to call our children home, to create the learning spaces that allows for children to come into their birthright, to learn what it is to be Anishinaabe. And in doing so, strengthening both the child and the communities once again. We know when our children are nurtured and taught through authentic community, their authentic cultural identity is given. And in that story that I shared, illustrated a good disconnection, that had those boys been in that land and on that land, that squirrel never would have got them. Because they would have known, they would have been familiar with the surroundings. Next slide, please, Heather. So when I say, Gine Mugi Ganak, Gine Mugi Ganak Ijitawin, to us, that means all of our relations. That's that family customs parenting. Now, what you're seeing in the picture here is our little guy. again, a lot of the work I do is taking our kids and reintroducing them back to Medeaki, the sacred land, because a lot of them have been raised in the urban crushed rock setting. So here, what you see is a sweat lodge being built, a community sweat lodge. And you see that it truly does take that village, because in our ways of knowing and being, in our ways of knowing and being, everybody encircles that child. In mainstream, everything goes on the shoulders of that mother. And that mother has to carry those children by herself. Within our family customs and our parenting styles, our children have aunties and uncles and cousins, and everyone works with them to support them in different ways that they might need that support. So again, what you're seeing here are the aunties teaching the children the protocol for how women interact with the sacred ceremony, which is what we know as the sweat lodge. So again, that's what that traditional parenting is. We're all working together, and everybody has, in our communities, when we see somebody not acting in a good way, it's our jobs as the aunties and the uncles to go and remind that child about respect and about, to take care of in a good way. That's how traditional family parenting is done. So when kids know that it's not just mom or dad that's going to be disciplining, but the whole community is watching you, you tend to carry yourself in a more respectful way, because everyone extended, our cousins are our brothers and sisters. Next slide, please, Heather. Okay, to us in the Anishinaabe way, we have the inherent birthrights of a child. This is believed in many Indigenous nations across the entire globe. Everybody comes at it with their own language, but in all the areas that I've traveled, this was put together through my language, Anishinaabe. So in these inherent birthrights, what these rights do is it gives this individual, this child, within the community, every person, for us encircling, because there's greater strength in numbers, and not one person can carry one job alone. So for us, every single child within that circle, if they walked in this way, with Manopamatase Win, that purposeful life, that Manopamatase Win gives that child direction of where to go and how to go, and the child knows they're walking forward. Anishinaabe Akin, each child has the birthright, has the inherent right to connect to their ancestral lands, to know their ancestral lands, to know where they come from, because we are the land and the land is us. Kene Mogi Ganak, a connection to their biological family. That is an inherent right for each child to have that connection. Anishinaabe Binjige Win, to know the cultural lifestyle of their own nation. So they know if they're Anishinaabe, they should know Anishinaabe. Right now in child welfare, sometimes what I'm seeing is we might have a Cree child, and that Cree child might be working with a Dene or with a Blackfoot. So that there becomes some of that confusion. So we try our best in terms of understanding what those inherent rights are. Anishinaabe Win, for their cultural identity, to know what does that mean. And that involves everything from their connection to their lands, their language. Indigenous Win, to know their spirit name. Each child that is born into this world, again, when I was sharing earlier, our ways go beyond just this physical world. We're very holistic in our approaches. For us, we work with the whole being, from the cognitive mind to the emotions, to the physical body, and then to the spiritual realm. That makes a whole person. That makes us whole. So in our ways of doing stuff, having that name, that spirit name, connects us back into our clanship. It connects us back into the land in terms of who we are and how we're doing. Like when you heard my name, that's the energy that I walk in. So for example, because I'm coming from the Bird clan, my clan responsibilities include culture, spirituality, and language. So this just happens for me naturally. Just coming out of the clan that I am and knowing the clan that I am, it was so natural for me to walk with these gifts. So by me taking, answering the call, I'm able to be here and to do the work and help as best as I can. So that's a good example of that. Anishinaabe Mowin, which is our indigenous languages. When you look at our indigenous languages, they are, they're verbal action, lots of action going on. Anishinaabe Minno Gosuin, our children also have that inherent birthright to belong to their cultural and ceremonial practices. They have that right to know what is it that their people do? What was practiced here prior to colonialism? What did that look and feel like? And G Dundam, which is what I was talking about, the clans connect. The clans connect everything in terms of prior to colonization, we also had a system in place. Our clan system that what it did was it helped us govern ourselves in structures so people knew what their function was within communities. We knew that if you were, again, in the Bird clan, your focus was going to be cultural, spiritual, language teachings, and that would be the area that you would sit. I won't get into the cultural teachings because then we will be here for a whole day, and it looks like can you do the last slide, please? Next slide. Okay, nope. Okay, anyways. Nina, Oe, we are all related. I wanted to show this at McDonald Youth Services, how I've done it to teach and pass on the knowledge is I've actually taken them out to the land. Not only do the kids come, but our workers are working alongside with us. We ask them walk with us. So, that's part of the teaching modules that we do. So that's what you're seeing there, my colleagues. Next slide, please. Agi Mina Gosuin, which we believe are the children are the gifts from the stars. We believe this. There's a long story to it. We're out of time, so next slide. Ande Pachagiwi. Seek your vision to the young ones, to the youth that are here. Go to the land and seek your vision. It is said that our people, you're not a man or a female, you're not a man or a woman until you go sit with spirit to seek your vision. Then you'll get your directions of where you have to go. Next slide. Calling our children home, Ambe Dawin, Anishinaabe Abenoji. This here is one of my little guys that I've been working with. He's been working alongside doing the work, and this is him at school. So he is calling to action his peers around him. He knows who he is. He has his name. He's been connected, and now the pride that he takes in sharing, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. So I'm just going to share this one last part. When our children are nurtured and taught through community, our authentic cultural identity is given life. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we call upon all Canadian people to walk alongside of us as we bring our children home, recognize and respect the self-determination of the grassroots people, especially at the First Nations community level. As Indigenous people, we know how best to raise our children, to heal them from the loss of our cultural identity, and to remind them of their origins and their birthplace upon Mede Aki. Kinewin Dunji Aki, Aki Dunji Giwin. Because we are the land, and the land is us. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. That was beautiful. And a wonderful way to bookend the speakers for the first part of this day, with Tom discovering that he has a community to learn, and Chrissy really making clear how strong the sense of community can be and is for Indigenous peoples. I think some of our other communities could learn a lot about just how strong a sense of community can be shared with young people. Many of us don't do it. Now, we're moving into the Q&A for our first three speakers, so I'm going to ask David, Melanie, and Chrissy to join us on stage, and Valerie McMurtry, who is President and CEO of Children's Aid Foundation of Canada, for our first Q&A. And I will pass things over to our moderator for the Q&A, Nick Kindler from Talk Boutique.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the time, and it's wonderful to share the stage with all of you, and thank you for all your presentations and talks this morning. I'd actually like to start by giving them all a round of applause. Thank you. Having had a chance to get to know and work with a number of the speakers here today, I'm really looking forward to this Q&A opportunity, and we are going to be accepting some questions from the audience, and so you can either tweet your questions to us using the hashtag 514 Talks, or you can write them on the piece of paper that you should have found on your seats. So and if you do want to write a question down, then pass it down to one of the 514 volunteers. Just raise your hand if you're a 514 volunteer, and they'll be happy to collect those. So. We have a number of questions that we wanted to cover off, and I'm going to start with a question I think that applies best to David and Melanie. And let's start, I'll start with you, Melanie. Both of you experienced challenges in the system, to say the least. And I guess it's a tough question, but the question is, how would you have changed that? What would you do to have made your time in the system better? I'll start with you, Canadian perspective, and I think your mic works, so you can have.
Oh, it does? Okay,
there
great.
you go.
Thank you. Well, I could talk all day about that, but I guess one of the major pieces that I think needs to be changed still to this day is that the system is not youth-centered. It's very systems-centered, and the intervention approach is very paternalistic. And I think that needs to change. And youth need to be brought to the table, as I was mentioning in my speech, as experts, because they know best what works and what doesn't work. And they know best what they need, what they want, what their dreams are. And sometimes all you need to do is give them the opportunity to say that, and then work around what they want, what they need, not what you think as a professional is best for them, because sometimes you get it wrong. So that's a short answer.
David, I see you nodding over there, and I know this is a question for you as well. What's your perspective?
I think one of the critical disconnects is that people go in with their own paradigm in terms of what a community should look like or what this child should or should not have, and they impose that paradigm onto the child as if they know better. But in doing this, they completely disregard the experience that that child has had. And it basically doesn't give them credit for what they've already have survived through in their life. Instead of saying that this is what you need to do, and this is what's going to make you a good kid, and this is what we expect from you, because we know better. Instead of saying, where are you? How do I take you from where you are right now? And not where, I need you to be. How can you teach me about your experiences and not feel that you're pitying that child? Because nothing's worse in foster care, nothing's worse in the street when a child feels pitied, because innate in pitying anybody is, I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, I have it better than you. And these kids don't want to be pitied. They want opportunity. They want to be able to have some credit for what they've already gone through and say, you know what, you're strong. Now let's see if we can make you stronger.
So you would shift the mindset.
Big time.
I want to, speaking of shifting, I want to shift a question over to Chrissy, and I want to ask you how you mentioned about healing within and bringing that healing into the community. How, as Canadians, can we walk alongside Indigenous families to begin the healing?
I think a good way is just to, indigenization is the, I guess in the Western way you would call it decolonization, but decolonization means to take something apart and bring it back together. Indigenizing is honoring what is already there. Like when we look at it, when this relationship first began on the onstart of the treaties in the 500 years ago, we were in a bartering system. So that was indigenization. We were indigenizing our spaces. Now it's more about money. It's more about the economy in the last 150 years. So I think part of this is just recognizing what Indigenous worldview is and just, do some reading, Google it up. Talk to a neighbor, maybe talk to an Indigenous person, but that is definitely, I think, a good way in terms of the worldviews because they're so different. They're very different.
So I liked what you said there, talk to a neighbor, really tapping into the community once again, and we are, that's our theme of today, redefining community. Valerie, Children's Aid Foundation is a funding organization, and I'm wondering how the organization is working on engaging the community at large. What are some of the efforts that are being done?
Well, thanks. I keep saying to our team, I consider us a nascent national organization because we just formally changed our structure last year. And we have great ambition to do more and to raise more awareness of the issues of child welfare and the challenges families face in communities all over this country. Because I look in on it and really think it's a misunderstood. It's one of the reasons this day is so important to us is that it's a pretty misunderstood issue, and it's kind of invisible in communities. And I think governments, provincially and federally, are working hard on trying to figure out how to do what they can do in systems and so on. Our role in a private foundation can be this awareness raising, and we launched Stand Up for Kids as a movement, as a campaign, where we're really asking Canadians to look in on this with us, because our kids are in every community struggling and they need attention. And I love all the messages I'm hearing this morning about finding a way to take hold of a hand and help a child and see them and families, because families, the best possible thing we could do, I guess, as a community is to strengthen families so that we don't have children coming into a system where the government's raising a child. So for us as a foundation, we're really motivated around those things. And yes, we're a fundraising organization, so we want Canadians to understand and then contribute. And they can do that in a lot of different ways. So that's what Stand Up for Kids is to us, and it's a way to mobilize the community.
Excellent. Now, we have a few more minutes, and I have other questions, but I'm wondering if we do have any questions that have been collected from the audience. Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay. So we have a question for David. David, what was the impetus, the decision to stop being a street kid?
So New York City has an interesting setup with their foster care system, and one of the things that they do is they have these things called observation group homes that they send kids to various junctions to make sure they're not turning into a Ted Bundy, I guess, or something. And one of these facilities were these group homes, basically, observation group home, was a place called Geller House, and it happened to be right across the street from a private school, a private Catholic school. And when they let the kids out from school, they would make us come in, us street kids. And so we wouldn't interact with them. And I remember sitting in the window. It's a single-family home that had been contributed to the city. And as they would walk by with their little crests on their jackets, and I would kind of talk back and forth to this one young lady who started just smiling and And eventually we started just communicating. And remember this boy came by and saw us talking. And he said, what are you talking to him for? Those are street kids. And there was a radiator next to the window. And I sat down on the floor with my back to the radiator. And I cried. I was so pissed. And then I got really ticked off. And I said, what makes me a bad kid? What makes me a street kid? Because I was born into a situation I had no control over. It's not my fault. So I started reading every book on diction, on manners, on you name it, because I decided at that moment nobody would ever look at me and shut a door without knowing me. If you don't like me because I did something to you, but don't shut me out without knowing who I am. And that was kind of a pivotal moment when I decided people would only see you as what you show them. So you got to show them more.
Wow. Thank you. We have time for one more question. This one's for you, Chrissy. You've got a big job ahead of you, and the question is, what is the work you're doing to help bring kids home?
I think the biggest part is connecting them to land, bringing them. The biggest thing is bringing them home to land. Bringing them home to the land, connecting them and building that relationship with the land. Even if you just baby step it, like go to the park, take your shoes off, go hug a tree, because the land itself, there's so many communities in there. There's the plant communities, the tree communities. Like for us, land is one large community. So it would definitely be to take them back to the land. Go to the land.
I love the fact that we've heard so many different definitions in a short period of time of community, and we've just added another one there, which is the natural environment. So that's beautiful. I wanted to thank the speakers so far today, David, Chrissy, and Melanie. So let's hear it for David and Chrissy and Melanie. Thank you. And Valerie, thank you for joining us. We're going to have Valerie back on stage after at the next panel, but we are going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll reconvene with the next couple of speakers. Thank you very much, everybody.
I am really pleased to be here on our third annual now 514 Talks. It's a big day for us and a really great opportunity to bring together an important network of people who care about our kids in this province and in fact across Canada.
Young people, and I call them amazing, but make no mistake, difficult things have happened to them, but they're just regular people, but they live extraordinary lives. Give youth a voice and make sure we hear, so that we can work with the youth to really design a system around them.
I want you to picture a system where every student is, regardless of their life circumstances, is acutely aware of their own intrinsic value within it as a pathway to academic success.
As I stand on this land as a visitor, as a settler, as an inherited and implicit colonizer, I need and want to begin by acknowledging and recognizing the Anishinaabe, Huron, and Seneca First Nations people of this traditional and ancestral land for the privilege and opportunity to gather together with you, to be and work and play, and all in a good way. With tenderness, seeking forgiveness, we exist in this space. My hands are up to you. I'm endlessly humbled to be here with all of you. And a friendly, Rocky Mountain climbing, latte holding, cycling, yoga pant wearing, rain drenched Vancouver hello to everyone. I am none of those stereotypes. I'd like to blame my sweaty palms on the humid Toronto heat, but it's Toronto heat. But it's actually just unjustly cold outside, and in reality, perhaps I can't hide the fact that I'm nervous. Don't worry, I won't shake anyone's hands. And I too have forgotten my Spanx, Tom. So as I sat and was bearing witness to the people who have come before me, the creases in my dress just increased. So, hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Oh, goodness, why am I here? Well, I asked myself that ginormously catastrophic, mind-numbing, truth-fumbling, fog-dwelling, all-encompassing, and succumbing existential-level crisis question of a person who has lived government care experience, multiple complex traumas, and 5 medical systems, special delivery, mental illness diagnoses every day. But why exactly am I in this place today, right now, sharing space with all of you? Because the places from which I have come, where these people with whom I share the stage have come, where my siblings in the system have come, can lead us to the places we need to be. I'll share in spoken word poem. What is spoken word, you ask? Such a curious crew. It's a form of storytelling with a rhythm and flow that's sometimes fast and sometimes slow, and weaves details and tales that illustrates and illuminates what it is you need to know to get to where you need to go. So, I ask your forgiveness as pieces of what I have chosen to stitch together I learned inside intimate and casual conversation while enjoying dinner last night, and enjoying their voices and the choices they made to be here, to face their "I'll blame it on the humid Toronto air" fear too. What a gift to consider that we can sit here and let the river of change that flows carefully from strangers caress us. Let the mess embrace us. Let the darkness fess up, and then let the light touch and test us. Let us, for a second, conceptualize through the eyes of a person from care the ideas of family and why possibly, most likely, realistically, most probably, that might be problematic, traumatic, fraught with futility as the young people fought with their will to survive and reconcile their birth. Define, realign, re-sign, resign, and redefine their worth. Begging to belabor the beginning, releasing the burden, relinquishing the anguish of existence, making sense of the inconsistence, the lack of love, the attack on all the senses, senseless, mysterious, masterless, powerless, less. To restory the guilt and the shame and the stress and the worry and the sickness and the, to find relentless forgiveness. Perhaps we need to consider our experience with the very fairy tale fabled notion of family, the motions of family, the emotions, the highs, but mostly only the lonely lows of family, the magical potions, the cures we concocted trying to conjure up a family, the ways we reproduce trying to create a state where we have our own family. Because family is sometimes not synonymous with love, but hate, and anniversaries of marked dates and broken bones and shattered plates and fractured and sedated states of mind. And we cannot be confined to the confines of darkness in which we are planted. I am testament to time and money and energy well spent, and I no longer want to be the exception, but the expectation to the rule. And so, instead, let's learn and lean into the possibility and productivity and ability, the sense and sensibility and sensitivity, the accessibility, the equal parts of our hearts that hold both strength and fragility, the flexibility, the fluidity, the maintainability, sustainability, maneuverability, approachability, indestructibility, stability, accountability, predictability, practicality, reliability, inclusivity, visibility, affordability for those who can appreciate that dollars make change, of shifting the focus from family to community and appreciating that more often than not, my community is my family. As they serve healthy helpings of all of the above rested on a foundation of humility and vulnerability and curiosity. Because we know that we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes, like with the brave people who have shared and who will share before you, sometimes we need to see and witness where we've been so that we can get to where we need to go. In restless silence, learning how to listen for the music of my symphony of resiliency, the many instrumental people who have chosen to journey alongside me and defend me and show me love through tenderness of touch and boundaries and dinners and coffees and school supplies and phone calls and, hey, I was just thinking of you. And hey, I believe so fiercely and vehemently in you. And walking in the land, hand in hand, just with their time and the ways they wrapped me in words and in their arms. My community, my family who call me home, a place from which I do not age out because care ought not to expire. And today we can start again because it's the beginning and not the end. And so with the sticky notes provided that are on the backs of your chair, I invite you to consider and then write it down and stick it in a place where you will be reminded and surprised and inspired by what transpired here today. What you can simply and tangibly do to be an instrument in a young person's symphony of resiliency. What music do you play? What truth song do you sing? Who are you calling to the house? To be of the house? Who are you calling home? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it for Meredith Graham. And I hope to see all of those sticky notes explaining how you're contributing to the symphony. I just want to once again reintroduce myself. My name is Nick Kindler. I am not Amanda Lang. Surprise. She had something very important to do, like reporting the news. So we were very fortunate to have her for our first half, and now you've got me. But we have also some wonderful speakers, and I want to just take a moment, though, and reflect back on Meredith. Now, for those of you that don't know Meredith, she is a youth advisor with the Ministry of Children and Family Development. She's an advocate and a poet, as you could see, an actor, a former youth in care based in Vancouver. She also serves as an advisor with the Vancouver Foundation and the Fostering Change Initiative. Now, as a poet, she draws upon her words and experiences navigating child welfare and mental health to inspire others to incite social change. With a degree in child and youth care counseling, her dream is to pursue a doctorate in counseling psychology and combine her passions to open a theater therapy studio where people can find belonging and healing through the narrative storytelling of their lives and experiences. And I so hope she does that. Let's give her one more round of applause, please. So welcome back, everyone, and I do hope everyone is filling out their words from the poem. And I hope that you were all also able to connect and chat through the break and talk about what you've learned from the first three speakers, maybe even relating it back to your own experiences in the community. Our fourth speaker is a tireless proponent of providing viable and sustainable opportunities to the Indigenous people of Canada. David Sharp is the CEO of Bridging Finance Incorporated. He has close to 25 years in the financial services industry with a particular focus on economic development for First Nations and Inuit communities. He is dedicated to education and to providing opportunities for self-reliance with economic growth to the community. From humble beginnings, David is deeply concerned for at-risk communities and their children. Please join me in welcoming David Sharp.
Great, thank you, Nick. Pleasure to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit about living in two worlds and accepting oneself. It's a journey, it's a lifelong journey, and it has been for me. But first of all, who in this room is Indigenous? Can you put up your hand? I'm interested. So who in this room is Indigenous who didn't put up your hand? You know, I only say that, I'm not trying to pick on anyone. That was me. I hid for a bunch of years, and I wasn't proud of it, and I felt shame as a result of that. It was a journey for me to know where I came from, and it was very difficult. I have an interesting life, if I do say so myself. I get to travel this country doing economic development for First Nations, and it's not easy work. But give you an example of that. In the last week, I had dinner with a big CEO, fancy dinner, fancy talk. It's all about money, for sure, and on Bay Street. You know, so I've been on Bay Street 25 years. I've been working, hiding. So that was one night. The very next day, I flew to Ottawa, and I did a sweat lodge. Sweat lodges are cool, very cool. Who's done a sweat lodge? Anyone? They're terrifying. Man, are they ever scary, because it is a spiritual ceremony. It's a ceremony where you climb into a little hut. It's not very big at all. And you climb in there, and there's men and women in there, and there's a couple of different kinds. I'm certainly not an expert on it. I've done many, and I'm learning. There's very, very hot rocks. We call those the grandfathers. And they're put in a fire, and they come out, and they're white hot, and they go into the middle of the sweat. The lodge signifies climbing into your grandmother's womb. So, Mother Earth, you're climbing in, and it could be a healing lodge, it could be a spiritual lodge. They're all spiritual. So this one was spiritual. And why we did this, and I tell you, it's the hottest thing you'll ever do. Think of a sauna. When you go in a sauna for maybe, 10 minutes, they recommend you get out. Think of 1,000 times hotter, pitch black. You can't even see your hand. And then you have an elder throwing water. And you say, please, no, elder, no more. No more water on the rocks, on the grandfathers. And you're singing. And even if you don't know the Indigenous languages, you'll be singing in there. So that was the day after I met with the CEO and had this fancy dinner. And it was a great experience. So why did we do the sweat? We did the sweat because there's an astronaut in Canada. His name is Jeremy Hansen. He's an active astronaut in Canada, lives in Houston. He's at the Johnson Space Center. He is great, very graciously, and I'm very, very proud of him, all astronauts, we have 4 active astronauts, by the way, all astronauts have to have a cause, and his cause is Indigenous youth. Whether you're in care or not in care, whether you're taken from your family, ripped away from your family or not. And I said, wow, what an opportunity. So I'm his ambassador. I get to take this astronaut. And I wish I should have brought some pictures. It's incredible to see. He's a big astronaut. He's 6'2", and he walks through the community. And he's wearing his flight suit. You know, those blue flight suits. It has NASA here and Space Agency. And I tell you, for the youth, it's an incredible experience, and for the children. So we were getting him ready to go up north with me. I just got back. And we were going to a community where I'm on the board of the Economic Development Corporation for that community, meaning that I'm trying to help them with opportunities that come in. It's called a Boomatung, which is Fort Hope First Nation. It's 300 kilometers, I'm bad directionally, it's 300 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay. You cannot drive there except if it's a very, very cold winter. They have ice roads. Okay, so if there's ice roads, they're functioning. Otherwise, it's a flying community. So what I do is I take Jeremy there. And the reaction, and, you know, I want to cry, and it breaks my heart to see these kids who live up there, and they have varying degrees of quality of life. Some are in care. Some have been ripped out and taken to Thunder Bay. And you know, the reputation of Thunder Bay when it comes to Indigenous people is a frightening, frightening spot. But these little kids, they gathered as a community. And they came out and they were yelling, "Hey, astronaut!" They couldn't remember his name. "Hey, astronaut." Then it turned into "Hey, alien." So it was kind of amusing. But he is such an ambassador with these young children with me. And I bring that up because when I look at these children, and these Indigenous children, that's really my cause as well. I look at them and I see kids who really do not have much chance in life. They just don't, and it makes you want to cry. And I probably hugged, it's a community of 800, I probably hugged every kid in that community. And we all know the stats when it comes to Indigenous youth, and they change, but I think Indigenous children, youth, make up 7% of all children in Canada. And what are they as far as in care? Are they 50%? I heard something. It's high. It's really high, right? And it's because of a couple of things. And it's because of the policies of the government. So I just wanted to raise that with you. You know, this Bay Street thing is interesting. I do it, but if I couldn't link that back to children and children in care, I wouldn't be doing it. So I'm the same person, 2 worlds. It's a good thing to live in 2 worlds, I think. Because if you do, you're giving your time. We can live in multiple worlds out there. I didn't see very many Indigenous hands, but I see a lot of great people who do a lot of great things for kids. So it's about experiences. I'll talk a little bit about my view of community and redefining community. Certainly, I strongly believe that you must give your time, and you have to get to know yourself. So as mentioned, I didn't know myself. I had no clue who I was. I knew that at the age of 5 or 6, I think I was 6, that I was Indigenous. And the way it happened is that I went back to my community. I was always going to my reserve. I'm from Tyndonega. The Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, Haudenosaunee, purple, that's our color. That's why I wore it. I wore this because that's me in my other world. So I went back and I went to my great-grandmother's funeral. So this is a place I'd go fish, I'd go visit, I'd spend my summers there. But I loved my great-grandmother, and I went back to see her when she went to the spirit world. And so I didn't even know what any of this stuff meant. Go to her funeral, and there's people in traditional dress dancing and singing. And I said to my dad, "Dad, what's going on here?" He goes, "Kid, you're an Indian." And yeah, it was quite something. For me, I thought, do I have community? Maybe this is my community. Maybe I can be embraced here. These were my cousins and all that, and some were in the community, some were ripped out of the community. As we all know, there's a very healthy system of Indigenous kids. We're very matrilineal, but if their mother's raising you and the establishment doesn't think that mother is doing a good job, the kid goes. And that's just a fact of life. So I found out, hey, I'm Indigenous. Wow, this explains a lot of things, you know. I'm a pretty good fisherman. On my reserve, we have a lot of pickerel, and I could catch a lot of pickerel. So I thought, okay, this does explain some things. But this is terrifying for me to come and see you all. I don't know if you saw me. Really terrifying. It is. I do a lot of public speaking in business, and I recognize some people in the audience, but I stood over there quite literally, and I don't know if you saw me, looking to see how many people I knew in the audience. And I was terrified. You know, I know this gentleman, I know these people over here. I didn't want to see anyone I knew here because I'm outing myself, you see. So I've been on Bay Street 25 years, but for the last 10 years, I acknowledged that as First Nations, I'm Indigenous because I wanted to grab power. I hid. So my experiences getting on Bay Street was that if you were different, and I don't want to offend anyone, but if you were different, need not apply. You know, just don't apply, because my experience on Bay Street was, quite literally, I look the way I look. You know, I'm a status Indian. It still says Indian in the Indian Act. I can show you my status card right here. But what some people say, you're white-facing. But what the elders would say, your heart's Indigenous. And that was very important to me, right? My heart is Indigenous. That's my upbringing. These are my peeps. So the week was a fascinating week. I rushed back to get here. But also within the week, you talk about, I'm still getting to know my family. And you talk about, this all happened in a week. Talk about people in care, youth in care. I got an email, and it said, in the subject line, it said, hello, cousin. And I go, whoa. Anyway, okay, he was one of my cousins. Most of us don't speak anymore, so it can't be one of those. It was somebody who found me. I found a cousin in the last week. And he said he's living in 6 nations. We call it the Six. He's living in 6 nations. He's from my community, Tynan Egg. And he said, I want to get together with you. He goes, we have the same relatives on both sides of my grandparents. So I was very impressed with this. You know, I'd be remiss not to tell you a little bit about my experience, because that's part of the journey for me. So hiding, trying to grab power, trying to be, I was fortunate because I'm white-facing, apparently. I was fortunate. But with my upbringing, as many of us do and have in Indigenous cultures, it was rough. You know, alcoholic father. You know, I love him dearly, and even that's complicated. But a very abusive household. Abusive, and I would never say this. There's a few of you here that know that, and I've talked to you about that. But to say in front of this room, but we have to. It's empowering. Because young people here in care have to hear that. They have to hear that, you know, although I was in a care, my house was a battlefield. You get pretty good at using these when you fight your old man at the age of 8 every other week. And I really praise not listening to this somewhere. But we got to be honest about that. So that was the upbringing that I had. And a lot of these children in care, and Indigenous children, have a very similar upbringing. And I heard about it today being passed around. So getting to know yourself. I decided I'm going to get to know myself, the good, bad, and the ugly. I'm going to visit the reserve. I'm going to talk to my cousins. I didn't have a lot in common with them, right? Because I moved away from the reserve, and I'd go back and spend summers. So it was parting to get to know myself. How could I help anyone else if I didn't know me? I couldn't, right? You know, my heart was bursting with pride about my culture, but I couldn't really do anything about it, so I decided to do something about it. You know, 25 years in Bay Street, so for the last 10 years, I said, no, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to work with our youth. I'm going to travel the country. I was telling some people earlier that I travel every week, and that's about 25 pounds right there of travel, just so you know. Proud of it. In some very remote communities, coast to coast, north and south. And when I travel, it is really, truly about the children. So in my corporation, I think we're one of the largest private debt funds in the country, they tell me, and we're a family organization. Decided with our employees, we're going to have to put our money where our mouths are, and we're going to do something about economic development with First Nations. Because for me, as an Indigenous person, there's only 2 ways I know. 2 ways I know to improve our lots in life. And one is economic development for programming for the children. So important. That is so important. The other is education. Let's get our kids in school and get them staying in school. If you don't feel welcome, you're not going to stay. You know, I look at these little gaffers up in Fort Hope First Nation. How many of these kids are going to stay in school when they have to hit grade 9 and go to Thunder Bay and essentially be in care because they're going to be built out? So that was very important to me. Now we do economic development in First Nations, and I told my employees, be brave. We're going to do this, and they fought me. You know, I'm the owner, one of the owners. They said, we don't want to do this. I said, we're going to do this. We have about $150 million to $200 million out for economic development for First Nations. And that is money when you build something, renewable energy, schools, arenas. What we say in First Nations land is hockey saves lives. And hockey does save lives. It just means kids get in programming. And they do stuff, and there's leadership within the community. All First Nations people, I don't want to generalize, love hockey. So when I went up there, I brought a gift for the chief, and she's a wonderful leader. It was a Beat It, Toronto Maple Leafs medallion. So I'm going to run out of time, but I just wanted to say, and I had so much more to say, that this is a uniform. This, what I wear is a uniform. It's not my heart. And when you look at what we do for our children, I think we just have to be honest and say, and be proud of your origins. Let's not feel the shame. You know, the youth in care and people who are former youth in care and people who are working in this room with youth in care, let's get over the shame and anger. And it's a lifelong journey for me. I'm angry a lot, I have to admit. You know, I wish my dad talked to me more, wish my other family members talked to me more, but that is a family that is disjointed. And there's a lot of hurt around that family. So lastly, this is my uniform. I'm going to take this off. It's only going to be my tie, okay? And I'm going to go, rah. And this is really who I am, is right here. And this is it. It's two worlds, accepting oneself to give back to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Sharp. Let's hear it for David one more time. And I'd like to thank David. I did have the pleasure of working with him leading up to this event, and it's a fascinating story. If you have a moment before you leave today and you can connect with David, he has a lot of more insights to share in addition to what he shared today. Our final 514 Talks presenter is Mahesh Prajapat. And Mahesh has over 25 years of combined experience in the areas of social work practice, and leadership. He joined Children's Aid Society of Toronto as their Chief Operating Officer in 2016. And Mahesh is a strong advocate and champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and has made this a foundational principle of his practice and leadership. He is committed to building partnerships within the community and coordinating and integrating service systems to ensure families are strengthened and that children remain safe, healthy, and strong while remaining in their homes and their communities. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mahesh Prajapat.
To be removed and separated from your home, from your family and your community because you are a victim of abuse, this has to be hard. This has to be hard for anybody. But today we're talking about children. I've been in the field of child welfare now for 27 years, and I can still remember the very first time I had to remove a child from their home because they were a victim of abuse. I was 2 weeks into the job. This was a slight 8-year-old little boy, and he had severe bruising up and down his back and down his legs. And he told me that his dad had beat him and that he had beat him badly. So I told this little boy to tell me a story. And he told me that his dad had soccer kicked him hard, really hard, and twice. He said that his dad had never done anything like that before, but this time he was really mad. He quivered as he told me his story, and I think he quivered because he knew that he wasn't supposed to be telling me this, but he found the courage to tell me. I can't imagine how scared he must have been in that moment. So, being 2 weeks on the job, I consulted with my supervisor. A short while later, the police arrived. We interviewed that little boy again. We interviewed that mother. We interviewed the father. And in less than an hour, in less than 1 hour, we made a decision to remove that child from that home. I can't believe how quickly and routinely that decision was made. So I remember the look on this mother's face as I left the home with her son. She just looked helpless. I remember the look on the father's face as I left the home with his son. He looked embarrassed and humiliated. There were no goodbyes, there were no hugs. We just left. I am the father of 2 boys. I cannot imagine what it would be like for somebody to walk into my home and to leave with my boys. Even if I had harmed them, I cannot imagine how I would ever recover from something like that. The ride to the foster home was really quiet. We got to the foster home. I walked up the steps. I was about to ring the doorbell, and he grabbed my hand. He must have been so scared. The foster parent answered the door, and she was amazing. She was full of life, full of love. She was just so warm and welcoming. And we sat at that kitchen table, and I remember just thinking about all the tasks that I had to complete. I had to fill in forms, medical information, personal information, complaints processes, and I remember being so focused on making sure that this 8-year-old boy knew his rights as a child in care. So I talked to him about his rights as a child in care. This little 8-year-old boy. He looked at me. I don't think he heard a word I said. He looked at me mostly with fear in his eyes. But I was relieved that I was getting through all the things that I had to get through. And as I was leaving, feeling quite proud of myself that I had done everything that I had to do, this little boy grabbed my hand hard, and with tears in his eyes, he looked at me and he goes, "You're leaving?" And so that kind of floored me, kind of stopped me in my tracks as I was trying to do all my things. And I didn't realize that at the time, but in those few short hours, I had become his safety net. You know, I had taken him from his home. I had taken him from the only safety and security that he had ever known. And he had experienced a separation of trauma from his parents, and he just was not ready to experience that again. And I can tell you that prying that little hand off of my hand and leaving that foster home was hard. It was hard. And I left, and I thought, he's safe, right? He's safe. He's not going to get soccer kicked tonight. He's safe. But he's alone. He's scared. He's got no one to call. He's going to go to bed tonight. He's not going to know when he's going to see his mom or his dad again, and he's going to be alone. He's not going to get hurt. He's not going to get kicked. But is he safe? That is a different and that is a complicated question. I can still recall this experience with vivid clarity. And it tells me that we know that children do best when they can stay at home and in their communities. It is really, really, really hard for governments and systems to raise children and expect those children to do well. It is a simple truth that it is hard for governments and systems to raise children. I don't know what happened to that little boy 27 years ago, but I hope that he went home. I hope that he went home. I hope that he didn't have to grow up in care because of one really, really bad day that his dad had. And I know that there are lots of young people here today that have grown up in care, and I congratulate you because you show tremendous courage, tremendous resilience, tremendous strength, and we have so much to learn from you. We have so much to learn about how we can do better. But what we do know What we do know is that the work of child welfare has to be about coordinating communities that surround families to make them stronger. Our work needs to be about helping families and communities protect their own children and less about protecting children from their families. So I want to say that again. Our work needs to be about helping families protect their own children and less about protecting families from their children. Sorry, protecting children from their families. We know that children do best when they are at home, yet we have tens and thousands of children that are in care in the province, and we have hundreds and thousands of children that are in care across the country. So how has this happened? How have we created a system that was designed to protect the most vulnerable children in our community that has led to so many unintended consequences? We know that we do some good work and we know that we've helped lots of children, but there's some really dark moments that are associated with children's aid societies. The 60 Scoop, the residential school systems, many marginalized communities do not trust children's aid societies and are afraid of them, and we know that there are very poor outcomes for children who grow up in care versus children who do not grow up in care. So how has this happened? One reason is that we have not examined how our view of certain people and certain communities informs our decisions about risk. If you are Indigenous, if you are Black, if you live in poverty, if you live in certain communities, there is a much greater likelihood that you are going to intersect with the child welfare system. We have a bias about who we believe is at risk and who is not. Let's be honest, we're not getting calls about families that live in the wealthy neighborhoods of Toronto. We know that there are children at risk in those communities, and those are not the communities that we are getting calls about. When we approach our work from our position of privilege, we do not examine our bias. And when we do not examine our bias, we cause unintentional harm. The social workers that participated in the 60s Scoop, they thought they were doing good work. They thought they were doing good work. They had no way of knowing that years later, people would describe their work as cultural genocide and that they were destroying entire communities. They had no way of knowing that. I ask you to reflect for a minute on what you saw when I described that little 8-year-old boy. What type of house did he live in? What did his parents look like? What was their socioeconomic status? What was the color of their skin? Who do you see when I describe that 8-year-old boy? You'll be surprised to know that he came from a very wealthy, upper middle class family. His parents were professionals and they were educated, and it was a white family. But chances are that's not the picture that you saw. We introduce risk where it doesn't exist simply because of our biases. We also have to examine how our view of risk extends to entire extended families and to entire communities. Currently, our biases extend to the fact that when we see risk in a certain situation, we extend that risk to extended families and to communities. And that is so clear with what has happened to the child welfare system and how it has intersected with our Indigenous communities. We have globalized that risk to entire communities. And that's why today's conversation about examining and redefining communities is so important. We have to see the communities that surround vulnerable children as strong, as caring, as capable, and as competent. Just because we see risk in a certain family and in a certain situation, it does not mean that that risk extends to entire communities. We are currently working with a 5-month-old baby who has a number of broken bones to his legs and broken ankles. The parents have told us that they have no idea how these injuries have occurred. The medical information is strong, and the medical information is telling us that these injuries were not accidental. I can tell you that a few years ago, that child would have been apprehended from that home, and those parents would have had a very difficult time getting that child back, given the nature of the injuries and given his age. They may never have gotten that child back. But today, because we were able to wrap a community around that family, uncles, aunts, grandparents, neighbors, church members, that child is safer today than that child has ever been. And there is a strong system of support around that family, and that child is safe. The police called one of the parents and informed them that they were going to be charged with the crime of assaulting that baby. After that parent got the call from the police, the very first person that parent called was the social worker to thank them, to say even though they don't know what's going to happen to them, they know that their child and that their family is stronger than it's ever been before because of the community of support that is wrapped around them. It is a powerful example of what we can do when we coordinate systems and when we coordinate families to help vulnerable children. And this approach does not mean that we don't pay attention to risk or that we are not vigilant to risk. It means the exact opposite. It means that we pay even more attention to risk, and we make understanding risk our fundamental priority. That little boy who was soccer kicked, his bruises will heal. But how do you heal from the fear and the trauma that he experienced that night? How do you heal from going to bed and not knowing when you're going to see your parents again? That is a difficult thing to heal from. And that will stay with him forever. And that experience that those parents experienced, that will stay with them forever. Risk is a complex thing, and it comes in many forms. This brings me to my final point, and that we have to see risk in its entirety. When we only focus on the risk that's in front of us, when we only focus on the broken bones and the injuries and the high-risk adolescent behavior, we miss the opportunity to practice from prevention. We miss the opportunity to build families and their systems of support and make families stronger. And it benefits everyone when we build stronger families and when we build stronger communities. We're doing better, but we have a long way to go. The marginalized communities that have intersected with child welfare in a negative way are not ready to hear about the fact that we're doing better work, because we still know that disproportionality is a big problem. At the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, we're making permanency a foundation of our values and our service principles, and we fundamentally believe that children belong at home. We are committed to this journey, but we know that we are at the beginning of this journey. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, there are hundreds of thousands of children in care across Canada, but what should motivate us is that every parent wants to be a good parent. Every parent wants to succeed. Even parents that harm their children want to be successful. Less judgment and more help. The most powerful thing that a child who had grown up in care ever said to me was, "I wish you would have spent more time helping my mom. My mom wanted to be a good mom. She just needed some help." That is a powerful thing that will stay with me. Like I said at the very beginning, it is very, very hard for a child to grow up in care and be removed from their family because they are a victim of abuse. When it is not absolutely necessary, we have to spend our time helping families protect their own children and less time protecting children from their families. We have to give families the right resources, the right tools, and the right support so that they can be successful, because that's what they want. With this, we can be humble and honest about our past. We can promise to learn from our past, and with integrity, we can promise to learn from our past. But we can also, if we work in this way, we can also look forward to a very hopeful future. Thank you.
Wow, that was I think, kind of unexpected, and I really, really enjoyed hearing that. Thank you, Mahesh. And you actually have just set me up perfectly, because I have some amazing news that I'm really thrilled to be able to share with you this morning, and it's on the very theme of Mahesh's talk. Now, when I look back over the morning's talks in aggregate, some really important topics have emerged, including giving children a safe passage through their childhood, the importance of strong relationships for youth aging out of care, connecting to land, culture, and tradition, providing opportunities for youth at risk, and changing the system. These are all themes that are central to our programs at the Children's Aid Foundation, and they help us prioritize for fundraising. So for the past 12 months, we've been working in partnership with the Ministry of Children and Youth Services, the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, the Child Welfare Institute, co-located at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, and a company called Generation Capital, on a new major prevention program that will invest new and different frontline supports to strengthen families and keep children safe in the community and with their own families whenever possible, therefore reducing the number of children and youth coming into our care system. The really great news is that last week this initiative, which we've called, I heard Mahesh use the word journey many times, so it's called Journey to Zero. We received a significant financial commitment of $2.25 million from the Balsam Foundation. And this cornerstone gift will lay the foundation for us to pilot at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto 4 independent but interrelated frontline prevention-based interventions. The outcomes from these, it will be a 3-year pilot, will be evaluated, and evidence and data gathered will be used to build support we hope to inform public policy changes down the road, and sustaining funding models to move more through this lens of prevention-based supports for families. We are really excited about the work we're doing, and a number, everything's so dark out there, I can't see everyone now, but the people we've been working with are in the room. Many of them are in the room today. Mahesh, of course, has been taking the lead on the program side of this at CAST. David Rivard is in the room, and he's been a big champion of this for the system with the government relations side at CAST. Jennifer Morris is here. I know that Assistant Deputy Minister on the policy side in the ministry, and her colleagues at the ministry have been really enthusiastic about this work. And Dr. Deb Goodman, who leads the Child Welfare Institute, is here as well. And of course, from Generation Capital, we have one of the new colleague for Andrea Hamilton, Ava Siffa, is here from Generation. So I'm super excited about this. This is a huge gift for our foundation. It sets a cornerstone piece. We have some additional funding to raise in order to get the whole program launched, and our fundraising team's really motivated to get that done. So I'm going to pass it back over to Nick, but I wanted to use this moment to just say fabulous work being done at CAST, and we're really excited to be supporting that. Thank you.
Well, that's incredible news, and it sounds like an incredible initiative. And I'd like to invite Valerie to stay on the stage and bring back Mahesh and David to talk a little bit more about this. Once again, we will be asking questions and asking all of you to fill in your question sheets. And again, we have our 514 volunteers around the room. So with that in mind, please take a moment, write down your questions, and we will start our panel. I think it makes sense to start with you, Valerie, based on that big announcement. Congratulations. Let's talk about this funding that has just been announced. I know you talked about a couple of things there, but do you have some more details on how this funding will be used?
For sure, the expert here would be Mahesh, but I'll kick it off and maybe you can fill in some more blanks. The big picture is exactly tied to what Mahesh was talking about. The private money we want to use to put new resources on the front line at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, really more or less at intake, to provide a different composition of resources to look at that risk lens. Currently when the child welfare workers go out on those calls, they're really looking at the 8-year-old boy, the 5-month-old baby, with different composition of resources like mental health support workers, youth outreach workers. We think we can look more broadly at the risk in the family dynamic and triage that differently. Is that a high-level summary enough that they're
Anything you want to add to that, Mahesh?
No, I think the only thing that I would add is that what we want for child welfare is we want the user experience to be different. And it's hard for the user experience to be different unless we can offer a different service. So when we offer services that are not investigative and focused on prevention, and families feel like they're not being investigated, but they're being helped through these types of services, it sends us on the right direction.
So this, I'm going to jump over to the wraparound approach that you had mentioned in your talk, and I think it's a hard thing for some of us to wrap our heads around. If the system shouldn't be raising the children, as we've heard a few times today, and they're at risk, should they not be removed? What does prevention look like in acute cases? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, prevention can take a lot of different forms. In that case that I talked about that 5-month-old, what it meant in that case is that we knew that one of the parents had caused the injuries, and at no time can any one of those parents be left alone with that child. So in that situation, prevention looked like making sure there was somebody, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, that was always with that child rather than removing that child. So prevention can take a lot of different forms, but it's also about not automatically assuming that one type of case automatically means one type of response. And understanding that even in high-risk cases, we have to open our minds and we have to open ourselves up to possibilities about how families can be helped. And I think that in the past, there has been a real narrow view of what service looks like in really high-risk cases, and there's an automatic move to removal, rather than looking at other possibilities and other options of what help and support looks like to families. And so strengthening families, counseling, in-house supports, conferencing, there's a number of different things that we can do to practice prevention.
Now, you've mentioned what other possibilities out there, and I want to throw it over to David, who's looking at business as a role and the role it plays in the role of generational healing. So what can you share or shed some light on what does the role of business play in generational healing?
Sure. When you look at the role of business, I think we all have to be leaders in that regard. With youth, with kids at risk, and in the Indigenous setting, it's really taking back a bit of power that was taken from the people. When you create residential schools, day schools, and we're just really starting to hear about these schools and through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And if you ask the average Canadian before that report came out, what do you know about the mush hole in Brantford on Six Nations? What do you know about the electric chair up north where they electrocuted kids? They didn't kill them, but that was a form of punishment. No one knew. Knowledge is power. I think we start with truth and the Truth and Reconciliation. That is so important that we just acknowledge that we failed the people, and we have to do something about it. So economic development, as mentioned, leads to programming. It leads to opportunities. I feel, and it's 14 minutes wasn't long enough, I have to say, I feel like a little rodent, on Bay Street. I'm running around and I'm covertly just grabbing little pieces of power for First Nations. And I run back to my hole and I take it and I say, look at that. We got a job for a First Nations person on Bay Street. And it's a win. And I'm constantly doing that until we start equalizing the power dynamic. So that's why we use economic development. If you can build a school in a community and you're doing well by the people and by the kids, I have to say, I don't know if you know this, in the northern parts of Canada, we force the kids to go to places like Sioux Lookout in the Ontario context and Thunder Bay, and that's just devastating. How many of those kids, some of them live in hotels, some of them live in a care, how many of those kids are graduating? It's not a lot. So you think that we're out of the woods, we're not. I'm going to keep on working at this, and we're going to keep on doing our best. But you have power in this room. You have lots of power, and please help. Please help those kids, because if I take you to a Northern Reserve, you're going to cry. You're not going to be the same as when you went there. I guarantee you that.
I could just add to that, and I agree with you, David, that leveling that playing field is a big part of what our foundation's focus is, and especially as it relates to youth as they leave care. So we're all about removing obstacles and providing opportunities, and business plays a huge role in this. So everything from helping more students achieve their post-secondary education studies, we can pay for that, help them with that. And it's also more and more our focus is on making sure that young people can break the cycle if they've been living through generations in their families of not being able to sustain themselves financially. And so being focused on employability skills and in real opportunities for internships. Our new relationship with RBC this year has really been important in that regard, a program we're running nationally to make sure that young people can see their way forward into financial stability is super important.
And I want to take the opportunity to get questions from the audience, or if there's any coming in from Twitter, remember the hashtag 514talks if you have a question. Do we have any questions that have been collected from our volunteers? I'm seeing, oh, we do. Okay. Compiling. There we go. Thank you very much. First question is for you, David. What are you proud of in your work with risk or at-risk or Indigenous youth? What are you most proud of in your work with at-risk or Indigenous youth?
I think it's skills development, seeing young people who are employable. They can stay on the reserve, or they can come off the reserve. I think the biggest reserve in Canada is Toronto. I don't know if people know that. But saying to those young people that we will employ you, come through the internships. The fine work that Bay Street's doing, it's so important. And just keep at it. In my example, it's a lifelong journey. If I can't do ceremony, it's life and death for me. And to have you people listen to, well, what the heck is ceremony? And now you should all want to be coming to a sweat lodge and share some of this culture. But to say to people, young people, they can come here, get our jobs, we can work with you, but we're going to understand your culture. That's so huge.
Melanie had mentioned in her talk about being shamelessly authentic. And you had said that your talk was about being between two worlds. How do you become shamelessly authentic and live in two worlds?
Be on the stage and be brave, quite literally. I would hide from this. I would like to do it one little piece at a time in business with chiefs and counselors and elders. But to come here, and this is power, and to have this. So I am trying to be authentic. It's funny, I'm accepted more on reserve than I'm here, I have to say, because Nick knows this. When I tell people I'm Indigenous, usually on Bay Street, they try to convince me I'm not. Literally, they'll say, no, you're not. I say, yeah, I am. And so, because I don't fit the stereotype. So if you're Indigenous, you look like me, or you look like some other person who's Indigenous, it doesn't matter. We all have the scars, I can tell you that. We all have the suicides, we all have the broken homes. No one in our world, I have to say, I haven't met one who's being exempted from that at all.
Thank you. I want to thank David, Mahesh, and Valerie for their time this morning. Let's hear it for all of our speakers. Now, I'd like to just help wrap things up by turning things over to Barry Hildred, the chair of the Board of Directors for Children's Aid Foundation of Canada. Please welcome Barry.
Well, once again, the 514 talks didn't disappoint. It's been a very incredible morning. And on behalf of the entire Children's Aid Foundation of Canada, I want to thank these 5 wonderful speakers that presented here this morning. They did an absolutely fantastic job. They gave us a lot to think about as we leave here today. I also want to thank our 2 performers, Tom and Meredith, that did a again, just a fantastic job, very riveting performances. I also want to thank all of the young people from our Young Persons Advisory Council. They were the vision behind this 514 events originally, so thanks for your attendance and your support. I also want to thank Nick, Amanda, and Reshma for hosting us this morning as well. So please, let's hear it for all the participants today. So all of our speakers today talked about community and showed us the different meanings of community, particularly in the context of child welfare. And a common thread in these communities, what underpins all of these communities, is relationships. Relationships between adult caregivers and children, relationships between youth and those who help transition them out of care, between youth and their allies, between youth and their cultural identity, and between youth and the child welfare system itself. The Children's Aid Foundation of Canada is committed to strengthening these relationships through our work, and hearing from these speakers today is reassuring that our efforts are addressing the critical elements that help children and youth in and from care have the best chance of embracing and being embraced by their community. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in today's event and for seeking to understand the realities that face Canada's most vulnerable young people, and for having the commitment to remove barriers that allow these kids greater access to the opportunities we all think that they deserve. It's our hope that 514 Talks inspire a growing and innovative movement to improve the lives of children and youth in care, now and in the future. And I know all of you here today can bring your own perspective, expertise, your experiences to really help shape this movement going forward. So together we really are a community for change. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. We're now going to move things next door. There'll be coffee, refreshments, opportunity to do a little bit more networking, maybe meet some of these speakers, and we look forward to seeing all of you again next year. Thank you.
Talks. Thanks very much.